Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing splendidly well. So I just watched Spider-Man No Way Home. Let's talk about it. Let's discuss. Let me just compose myself. Come on, Jean, you can do this. Okay, so first of all, okay, hi. If you haven't watched Spider-Man No Way Home yet, if you are a huge Spider-Man fan and you haven't seen the film, or even if you are just vaguely interested in seeing this film, please click away now. Please click away now. This is going to be a spoiler review. We are going to be going in on this film, so just click away as soon as you can. Thank you so much for tuning in, for checking out my video in the first place. I really appreciate it. I know it's very rare for a YouTuber to tell you not to watch their video, but I'm telling you, the less you know about this film going in, the better. And I already know that, you know, America is getting this film later than the UK and some of the rest of the world did, so there are probably a ton of spoilers, especially on social media. If you can avoid social media and you're looking forward to seeing the film this weekend, then please click away now. And also just don't even look at the chapter times, because I'll try my best not to reveal anything, but just click away. Thank you guys so much for watching. Tune in, you know, come back when you do see the film so that we can discuss. But for those of you who have seen what I saw, for those of you who have experienced, okay, the film, the revelation that is Spider-Man No Way Home, come in. Come in, join in, okay, take your seat, get comfortable, grab a snack. I have a feeling this is going to be a long one, and let us discuss. Now, before we get into it, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Now, without further ado, let's get into all of my thoughts, if possible, on Spider-Man No Way Home. So Spider-Man No Way Home is directed by Jon Watts, and I really want to emphasize this. Like, I don't want this to be forgotten in all of the hype and excitement surrounding the film and what it achieves, because let's not forget that Jon Watts directed this one as well. He has, of course, been directing all of the Tom Holland Spider-Man films, and he has been doing a great job with each and every one of them. But here, spoiler alert for my thoughts, I guess, but he definitely outdid himself on this one. He definitely put that special something into this one. He gave it his all, and you can tell, because the mammoth task that he had ahead of him and the mammoth expectations of fans in light of the rumors, in light of everything that was, you know, rumored to happen in this film, you know, these expectations were just so high up. The fact that he met them and even in some places exceeded them, I refuse to allow that accomplishment to go completely unnoticed. So this film is directed by Jon Watts, and this film picks up right where we left off in the previous Spider-Man film, Spider-Man Far From Home, where we saw Mysterio at the very end there, with his last gasping breaths, reveal the true identity of Spider-Man to the world with the help of J.K. Simmons' J. Jonah Jameson. And of course, at the end of that film, the world found out that Spider-Man was in fact New York's own Peter Parker. And you see Peter in the middle of, you know, Times Square, discovering this news at the same time as thousands upon thousands of people in the city. He is in the middle of this city, completely vulnerable, and all of a sudden everyone turns to him. And MJ as well is also very vulnerable, standing next to him, and they just like compound upon him. They just race towards him. There are cameras, there are, you know, people with their phones, people asking all of these questions, and immediately you're thrown into the thick of it. Now, I do think that the first third of this film is focused on exploring the consequences of this massive reveal that Mysterio made right at the very end of Far From Home. It doesn't shy away from just how heavy and just how difficult it was for Peter and for those around him, for the world to find out about his secret identity identity, because let's not forget, Peter Parker or Spider-Man is one of the few heroes in the MCU, especially in the films, that actually has a secret identity. Like, he isn't like Tony Stark, where he revealed his identity almost immediately at the end of his initial film, or like Steve Rogers, who everyone associated with as Captain America to begin with. You know, Peter Parker has kept his identity secret for the sake of himself, but also for those around him, and now that's all been destroyed. Like, that's all imploded because of Mysterio, and as a result we see the consequences of that in the first part of the film, where we see Peter and his friends and loved ones have lost all privacy. Their lives have kind of imploded, and even their future prospects have been affected by this. This is a crucial time in their academic careers where they're trying to apply to universities, and now they're getting back rejection letters simply because of their association with Peter Parker, who is now known to be Spider-Man. So it is really heartbreaking to see how, you know, this big reveal affects everyone around him, and he feels so guilty. Like, this is Peter Parker's like whole thing, okay? He's like, this is all my fault, I feel so guilty, and honestly he shouldn't, but at the same time, you know, it's understandable that he feels so much responsibility for what's going on in his friends and in his loved ones' lives, especially when you get that scene where they're all in the cafe, you know, him, Ned and MJ, they're holding their letters from MIT, and they've already received rejection letters from their backup unis, but MIT is like their dream university, and this is their one last hope, and they just hold their breaths as they collectively open the letters. And that moment where they're reading those letters, that was so well done. As someone who remembers what it was like to get those letters from universities a few years back, I completely identified and related to that moment, and the fact that they were like reading it, but clearly they were rereading it. Like, it's not enough to just read it once. You're like, let me understand these words that are in front of me. So they're just like rereading it, and you can just see the looks on their faces, and then it's just like the small shake of the head when they realize that their hopes of going to MIT together are completely dashed, and it's all because of this massive reveal. Now this, as well as some of the other concerns that are explored at the beginning of the film, like for example the safety concerns, the fact that some people fail to recognize the fact that Spider-Man helped save the world, nay, the universe. He helped save the universe, but no, he's not getting any credit. Instead, he's being called a vigilante, he's being called out of his name, all sorts of things, especially by J. Jonah Jameson, who, by the way, J.K. Simmons killing it as per usual. Like, please, we already knew. But he is being dragged through the mud, you know, completely unfairly, because he is a hero after all. And then there are some people who have the gall, who have the audacity to be like, Mysterio was right. Right about what? Right about, like, what was he, what? I was so furious, like, considering how much Peter lost fighting against Thanos, the fact that he had to stand there or to kneel there over Tony Stark's dying body, and these people have the audacity to be like, oh, Mysterio was right. Or worse, the people who, as we've seen in the Hawkeye series, are actually going around saying Thanos was right. Thanos was, please. It just drove me insane, but at the same time it's realistic, because we know what the landscape is like in the world, especially when it comes to politics. So there's always going to be that one person who's going to turn around and be like, you know what, Thanos had a point. And honestly, it makes me sick. It absolutely makes me sick, and we see the repercussions of that on Peter and his safety. People throwing bricks into his apartment, like, really, oh, it just made me ill. And then of course you have the legal element. We do see the scenes where they're interrogated by this FBI agent who needed to calm the hell down. Okay, he was talking to Aunt May like, oh, you're gonna be done for child endangerment. Like, How dare you? But to be fair, their legal troubles were quickly wrapped up with a nice little scene that we got with none other than Charlie Cox's Daredevil. Oh my goodness. It happened so quickly. Okay, I must say, the Daredevil cameo happened so quickly that I blinked and all of a sudden Charlie Cox was like on my screen. I didn't understand what was going on. I was like in the cinema like, wait, hold up. Am I looking at Charlie Cox's Daredevil? Whoa. It was such a shock, but honestly it was a welcome surprise. I mean, I already knew he was going to be in the film, but we didn't know at which point, and it just happened so quickly. There was that moment though where of course someone threw the brick in through Peter's window and he catches it and everyone's looking at him like, aren't you supposed to be blind? Aren't you supposed to be blind? And I just felt like getting into the scene and telling Peter, listen, you have no idea what this guy is capable of. You just go ahead and check out his series on Netflix. And honestly, the Matt Murdock cameo in the film was one of those things where I already saw coming, like I already knew it was gonna happen. But when it did happen, it still shocked the hell out of me. And there are so many moments and so many elements of this film that are like that. And that's just what made it so phenomenal. That's just what really blew my mind about this film. So anyways, the first part of the film deals with the big reveal and the consequences and fallouts from that, and so it makes sense then when Peter turns to Doctor Strange to ask him for some help, you know, to see if he can go back in time and fix things. And of course Doctor Strange reminds Peter that he actually no longer has the time stone, for one, and two, it would be incredibly irresponsible for him to do so anyway, to disrupt the timeline and whatnot, just so he can have a little bit less of an inconvenience because of this massive reveal and how it's affected the people around him. And you do see that dejected look on Peter's face, and you know, Doctor Strange's heart kind of softens a little bit and he's like, okay fine, but I can think of one spell that could help with this. Now here's the thing about this whole scene. First of all, when I saw it in the trailers, I was convinced that that wasn't the real Doctor Strange. I was convinced that it had to be some sort of variant of Doctor Strange because he was acting so bizarrely. He was so quick to acquiesce to Peter's request and perform this spell that could potentially destroy the fabric of reality itself. Like, I just felt like that was a little irresponsible and a little blasé for Doctor Strange, but it does seem to be the actual Doctor Strange in this scene, so we're just gonna have to chalk it up to some inconsistencies in writing, especially when it comes to this character and how he was portrayed in the first Doctor Strange movie. However, having said that, you know, the second thing that kind of came to mind when I saw the scene play out in the context of the movie so far was that they did do a good job of justifying why Peter would go to Strange in the first place, the kind of desperation that he would feel considering how heavily this has impacted his whole life. And they also kind of made it make sense, you know, as to why Doctor Strange would help him, considering how much they have been through, you know, fighting with Thanos in space and everything. So yeah, even though it was still a bit weird for Doctor Strange to do all of this, and also the spell itself kind of going haywire was very out of character for him, but still they did their best to kind of justify the sequence of events that play out. And speaking of Doctor Strange himself, he is of course in this film, that's no secret because he was all over the advertising, but you know, I just want to mention the wig situation isn't popping. Like, the wig situation isn't perfect. Maybe we can consult with one of those Afro-Caribbean hairdressers who know how to lay a wig, who know how to blend in the hairline, make it look all natural, okay? I'm telling you, there are a bunch of them in London. You just give them a ring. They would be happy to help out because this just ain't it. I also wanted to point out that just before things go left with Doctor Strange's spell, the beginning of this film does feel very much like a Spider-Man movie. Now, one of the criticisms that I've heard from Spider-Man fans about Tom Holland's Spider-Man series is that it's felt too much like an MCU adjacent franchise. It hasn't felt Spider-Man-y enough, especially with its over-reliance on these, you know, male figures in Peter's life that act as kind of father figures for him, where we started off with Tony Stark, and then of course course, we had Mysterio in Far From Home, and now we have Doctor Strange himself acting as this sort of quasi-father figure, although somewhat reluctantly. So that was one of the main criticisms that a lot of people have had over the years, but I do feel like the beginning of this film kind of tries to ground it in a Spider-Man world. We do see him go to school even after the blowout from this whole big reveal, and I did love that scene where he heads into the school and you see like his teachers who we've seen in the Spider-Man films previously, especially Martin Starr. Martin Starr, who's hilarious, and he's like fanboying over him, and he's like, listen, feel free to crawl over the walls if you want to, like, just make yourself comfortable, Peter. And people don't know whether to like root for him or to cheer for him or to, you know, shout at him and accuse him of heinous things. So that was a really funny scene, but at the same time it kind of, you know, re-emphasized just how much this is affecting Peter and everybody around him's life. But then of course you get the moment where Doctor Strange's spell goes left, and like that, it's a wrap. It's a wrap from there. Like your ordinary Spider-Man film, it is no longer. And at first it starts off as like a, you know, Pokemon gotta catch them all situation. We start seeing a sprinkling of these villains from other Spider-Man franchises, starting of course with none other than Doc Ock from the Sam Raimi franchise. They have this big fight sequence on this bridge, and it's like incredible to see this character who we haven't seen in like 20 years show up again, looking great, looking fresh faced from that, you know, Disney de-aging, and we get to see them fighting and interacting with one another. And it's interesting to see how Doc Ock, you know, sprinkles in these like thoughts out loud about how different things are, you know, until of course there is that big reveal at the end of their fight where Peter is hanging upside down and he sees his face and he's like, hold up, you're not my Peter Parker. I love that. I love how everyone's like, you're not my Peter Parker. Like they actually feel possessive of him. But after realizing what's happening, Peter goes after the villains one by one, and we have Ned and MJ acting as his kind of guys on the chair where they're searching for these villains, seeing where they would pop up in this universe. And you know, that's kind of cute. I like the fact that Ned and MJ was so involved in this story. First of all, it helps this version of Peter Parker stand out from the rest because he does have these kind of friends, and of course his girlfriend MJ, that feel teenage-like. Like the thing about the other Spider-Man franchises is that the characters never felt like teenagers. They never felt like kids, whereas these three, like, they feel like genuine teenagers, and their reactions are very much akin to how, you know, regular kids would react in this situation. But at the same time, they have this very endearing loyalty towards Peter, and even though he is sincerely apologetic for how, you know, he's negatively impacted their lives, they still want to stick with him. They still want to help him and do the right thing, and I think that's really touching. And also I must point out that Ned and MJ do add some diversity to this film that is otherwise populated by white men. Like, let's be real. But anyways, we see Peter go up against some of these bad guys from previous franchises. I will say I can only imagine what it must have been like for like the two people in the audience in the cinema who watched that sequence and like had no idea that it was going to happen. Like, can you imagine if you hadn't seen a single trailer, if you hadn't heard a single rumor, if you hadn't heard Alfred Molina himself reveal that he was going to be in this film? Like, if you had just been in the dark about this film entirely, but you were still a huge Spider-Man fan, and you walked into the cinema and saw that, that must have blown your mind. That would have just like, wow, like it would have been so incredible. It would have been like those moments in Avengers Endgame that no one saw coming, like, you know, Steve holding up Mjolnir or something like that. I can only imagine how amazing that would have been. Unfortunately, I wasn't in that position. I saw the trailers, I heard the rumors, so I already knew it was going to happen. But man, like, if you're one of the two people in the world that didn't, then congrats, like, good for you. And then, like I said, we kind of get a lather, rinse and repeat situation with Electro, Lizard and Sandman. We don't really get to see how Lizard was even captured. He's kind of just like in the dungeon when we meet him, and he's obscured by darkness, likely to save the animators some time and effort in trying to animate this largely CG character. So yeah, at that point it's kind of run of the mill. Like, it's fun to see and it's exciting because these characters are from different franchises franchises and they're interacting with like Tom Holland's Peter Parker. Whoa, it's crazy. But you know, just like narratively speaking, it's not the most interesting, mind-blowing thing in the world. But things do get interesting when they introduce the character of Norman Osborn, aka the Green Goblin. None other than Willem Dafoe portraying this character again after 20 years. 20 years, like that just blows my mind. There's literally nothing else like this. But yeah, after 20 years, he pops up in his full Green Goblin regalia, but he immediately or almost immediately removes the kind of helmet, the kind of mask that he had, because you know, one of the biggest critiques of that entire costume that people had was, why would you obscure Willem Dafoe's face when he already is such perfect casting, you know, both in terms of his acting ability but also his physical features. He is the Green Goblin. Why would you obscure his face? And actually, when we next see him, he's no longer the Green Goblin. He's just a scared and confused Norman Osborn, and he actually meets up with Aunt May. And when Spider-Man, you know, comes in running, he's terrified that one of these villains from alternate realities are going to hurt Aunt May, and he just finds them having a conversation on the desk. And it's there that Aunt May kind of changes the parameters of this mission, where she tells him, like, you know, instead of sending these bad guys back to their realities where they're doomed to be, you know, killed almost immediately, why don't you try and help them? Like, that's what Spider-Man does. Like, that's what Spider-Man is supposed to do, is help people. And I feel like that was a very interesting angle, especially for this character, again, to distinguish him from the rest of the Spider-Man. The idea that he wouldn't just look at these bad guys as, you know, things to take down or destroy, but rather try to find cures for them, try to heal them, so that when they do return to their worlds, hopefully they would change their paths, like they would change their destinies. And it's with this advice from Aunt May that the story kind of changes direction and turns into one of second chances. You know, second chances is a huge theme throughout this film, both in terms of the villains getting second chances after they are healed and being able to go back to their worlds and changing their fates, but also in a kind of meta level, the second chances that some of these characters from other franchises have gotten now that they're making an appearance here. You know, there's definitely times when you can see, you know, John Watts and the team trying to rectify some of the issues that the previous franchises had and giving these characters the second chances that fans wanted them to get. Okay, so now that I shared my thoughts on the story overall, I did just want to go through some of my critiques. This is a review after all, okay, please don't hate me. But there are a few things that I noticed that were less than perfect about the film, you know, amidst the shock and awe of seeing all of these great characters come back here. So first of all, I will say that the scenes that take place in the crypt underneath the Sanctum Sanctorum, where all of the villains are kind of locked up in these cells after Spider-Man has caught them, are medium. Those scenes are medium. Like I said, they take place in the dark, you know, and characters like the Lizard barely have any play in these scenes. It is fun, okay, to see these characters from different franchises interact with one another and kind of fill in the blanks in terms of information, you know, like Doc Ock saying how Norman Osborn died, you know, it's impossible that the Green Goblin would be out there, and Electro filling everyone in on the Lizard. Like, it's fun seeing everyone interact, but that novelty isn't enough to create a sensational scene, and I feel like that whole setup got old pretty quickly, and it was good that they changed setting pretty quickly as well to kind of keep the ball rolling. And secondly, just more generally speaking, the action sequences in this film were pretty abysmal. The action sequences were pretty abysmal, okay? Was it fun to see Doc Ock fighting against Tom Holland's Spider-Man? Absolutely. Did that blow my mind? For sure. But then once I gathered my thoughts back, okay, once I managed to gather the pieces of brain that are scattered across the cinema floor, I did realize, I did come to see that the action sequences, just technically speaking, are kind of messy. Like, they're kind of a mess. It's difficult to follow the different movements of the characters. The CG is CGing. The CG is CG. And I know that the animators, you know, people in special effects were working day and night to try and get this film out on time, looking halfway decent. So it's no disrespect to them whatsoever. But the CG in some places is very wonky. And I just think it's a case of them having to meet this almost impossible deadline. And probably there was a bunch of crunch time involved in that. And I really do feel for them. But given more time, I do feel like they would have been able to create a more seamless blend between the real and the manufactured. And then also, not to nitpick on this story too much, like I don't want to be that girl, okay, but there are some glaring plot holes. There are some pretty big ones, okay. First of all, the villains are supposed to have been transported to the MCU at the time when they were about to die, but that doesn't actually make sense for most of these villains. First of all, the Lizard from the Amazing Spider-Man universe didn't actually die at the end of that film. He was cured and then he was kind of locked up, so he didn't actually end up dying. So it is weird that Doctor Strange says that, you know, they've been lifted at the point of time where they were about to be killed by Spider-Man, because that's just not true for the case of the Lizard from what I recall. And Doc Ock also wasn't killed by Spider-Man in Spider-Man 2. He fell and that's how he died. And also he had kind of already broken out of his spell at that time, so it's weird that when we're introduced to the character he's all evil again, although maybe he made that switch upon arrival. And also Sandman wasn't killed by Spider-Man either in Spider-Man 3. And it is also weird that, you know, when we're introduced to the character in this film, he automatically helps Peter out when he's fighting against Electro, and that kind of doesn't make sense because the character's whole thing in this film is that he doesn't trust anyone. So the fact that he trusts Peter almost as soon as he meets him and actually fights along with him against Electro is kind of bizarre. And then later on he inexplicably turns against Peter in favor of siding with the rest of the villains, which also doesn't make sense because his whole purpose for siding with Peter in the first place was because he believed Peter could get him back home to his daughter. So when he turns against him, you know, to fight with Electro, who wants to stick around because of the energy of this universe, it doesn't actually make sense. And also, speaking of Electro himself, he makes very little sense in this film too. First of all, when we're introduced to this version of Electro portrayed by Jamie Foxx, he's looking buff, like he's looking so much better than he did in Amazing Spider-Man 2. And like, I don't blame Jamie Foxx. No one wants to go back to looking like that if they don't have to, okay? He's like, listen, I'm gonna be in this big MCU movie, I ain't looking like that. I refuse. So he enters the MCU and he already has a shape up, and they explain it away by saying it has something to do with the energy or whatever. And finally, the timelines in this film are kind of all messed up. Like I said, the idea is that the villains were plucked from their realities pretty much the moment that they were about to be killed by their respective Spider-Men. But then when we're actually introduced to those Spider-Men, we see that, for example, Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man is like 20 years older, because he actually is 20 years older in real life. And so it doesn't quite make sense that Norman Osborn would be thrown into the MCU the second before he was about to be killed by Peter Parker in the first Spider-Man movie. And also, you know, what's the point of curing him to begin with to send him back, because the Peter Parker that he encounters is going to be the one from 20 years back and not the one that we see in this film, who is 20 years older. So surely he's just going to end up dead again? I don't know. Unless he can quickly explain to Peter, you know, what happened, and if Peter believes him, then I guess he has a shot. Like I said, you know, Tom Holland's Peter Parker was just trying to and give these guys a second chance. There was no guarantee. Okay, so now that we've gone through the story, the plot points and the plot holes and all of that, let's get into ranking some characters. Let's get into the villains first of all. This was a very villain heavy story, even though in the film itself the villains aren't very well developed or very well written, and largely speaking the knowledge that you have of them and their motives come from, you know, the information that we got from their respective films. You don't really expand upon that in this film. So if you haven't seen those previous films, then a lot of these villains, and honestly a lot of these story beats and most impactful moments, won't mean much to you. So right at the bottom of my list, we're not even going to expand upon these guys. We have the Lizard, who's just pointless here, like he's just cannon fodder really. And then we have Sandman, Spider-Man, who, like I said, kind of contradicts himself halfway through the film. And then next up, a slight level up, we have Electro. Again, his motives and backstory and all of that aren't really expanded upon in this film, and they weren't really well done anyways in Amazing Spider-Man 2 to begin with, so we're not working with much. I will say though, one stroke of genius that I appreciated was having Electro absorb the energy of an arc reactor. I thought that was clever. I thought that made sense. You know, I didn't quite buy his whole like, oh, the energy in this universe is different and whatnot, and it gave me a shape up. It gave me a six-pack, but the fact that he did become attracted to that arc reactor energy, I think was a clever idea, and it was a great merging of the Amazing Spider-Man verse and the MCU. And another standout moment for Electro for me was when he was interacting with Andrew Garfield's Peter, and he was like he was like, I thought you were black. I thought you were black. Like, that's why I was excited. Like, that's why I was such a big fan of yours. Low-key, I thought you were a black man under there. And like, honestly, that was hilarious. That was so funny. Like, he even points out there must be a black Spider-Man, you know, in some universe out there. And a huge part of me wishes that we had seen just a hint, just a clue towards such a Spider-Man. But whatever, we need to move on. I love the fact that Andrew Garfield literally apologizes. He's like, sorry. So next up on the docket, we have Doc Ock, and I do feel like it's a significant jump between Electro and Doc Ock, because Alfred Molina in this role was just like, it was amazing. And I'm telling you, you know, I haven't even mentioned up until this point, but I'm not even the biggest Spider-Man fan, by the way. I am not the biggest Spider-Man fan. I recently refreshed my memory of the Spider-Man franchises. I rewatched the Sam Raimi films and the Amazing Spider-Man films directed by Mark Webb. So, you know, this is all kind of new in my mind now, but it wasn't really because I like always go back and watch Spider-Man films. It was for an upcoming video. So I'm not the biggest Spider-Man fan in the world, but seeing Alfred Molina, okay, as Doc Ock, like, even I got chills, okay? And also the de-aging, he looks great. And I also love the fact that he became a good guy in the end. Like, at least one of them needed to. And I really liked the fact that the procedure worked. The kind of microchip that Peter developed with Norman Osborn was able to, you know, reverse the negative side effects of the technology in the arm that had turned him evil or whatever. Spider-Man logic. Someone in the film pointed out that a lot of these Spider-Man villains' origin story is just them becoming, you know, this like experiment gone wrong and it turns them evil. And like, yeah, you know, it's the same here where Doc Ock had these like arms that turned him evil, and they were able to reverse that in this film. And I really did enjoy the fact that he was fighting alongside the Spider-Man, especially because, you know, when we're introduced to the character in Spider-Man 2, he is a genuinely nice guy. And of course, it was super touching when he was reintroduced to his Peter Parker, Tobey Maguire, and the fact that he was just kind of looking at him like, man, you've grown up. Like, he seemed so genuine and like genuinely happy to see him. That was a really nice moment. And then lastly, when it comes to the villains, we have the GOAT. We have the VIP of this film, and that is Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn, aka the Green Goblin. I had no idea that he was going to, one, play such a massive role, two, be so exceptional, and three, that his actions would have such dire consequences. You know, considering that the promotional material focused so heavily on Alfred Molina as a Doc Ock, I was so surprised to see how integral, you know, Willem Dafoe was in this film. And I love the fact that he came back and gave it his all. Like, this wasn't just like a check to cash in. He was actually trying. Like, this isn't like Hugo Weaving, who portrayed the Red Skull in Captain America: The First Avenger and then refused to return for Endgame. Not only did Willem Dafoe return for this role, but he actually gave it his all, and he was an exceptional Green Goblin. And this might be controversial to some. Like I said, I'm not the biggest Sam Raimi Spider-Man fan, but I actually think low-key that Willem Dafoe was better here. I think he's only good. I think he's aged like fine wine, and so has his portrayal of this character. He was phenomenal. First of all, we do see the character schizophrenia playing out, where he has two sides of him battling against each other. The evil side, that's the Green Goblin, and the good side, that's just Norman Osborn, who's like confused and shocked because he went to his flat and he found that no one was there, and you know, what is going on. Now, whilst I disagree vehemently against this insistence, this obsession that Hollywood has with portraying people with mental illnesses as being super violent and like wanting to destroy everyone and everything, like I disagree with that wholeheartedly. Like, please leave mental illness out of it, okay? But I do think that Willem Dafoe did a good job of portraying both sides of this character, and also that switch that happens where they're in the room, they're in Happy's apartment, and Peter has this like tingling, the Spidey senses are tingling, but it's like an elongated one. Like, it happens over time because I feel like it reflects how long it took for the Green Goblin to fully come out of Norman Osborn. And by the time they had come out, you know, Spidey was on it. Like, you can just see in Tom Holland's face, like, hold up. There wasn't a threat before, but now something's wrong. That was an excellent switch. And then of course, once the Green Goblin returns, all hell breaks loose. He manages to turn the other villains against Peter and go against his plan to bring them back cured and happier. He's saying like, there's nothing to cure, there's nothing wrong with us, like we don't need to be healed or whatever. And so he turns everyone against him. Again, not everyone's motives should line up to his, and it doesn't always make sense, but that sequence that takes place afterwards is pretty impressive, pretty impactful. And then of course you have how it ends, which is with Aunt May dying. What on earth? What on earth? I was so upset. I was bawling. By the way, this film made me cry several times easily. So, like, I cry at everything. This film made me cry several times, and this moment in particular with Aunt May dying was the second saddest scene in the whole film. We'll talk about the first, okay? But the fact that it's preceded with Aunt May finally delivering the words that we've been waiting for to Tom Holland's Peter Parker, you know, with great power comes great responsibility, or a variation of that. I think it was just mwah. I think it was perfectly done. I think Marissa Tomei sold the hell out of that scene, okay? Those words have such meaning, especially to Spider-Man fans. So I think she delivered on that incredibly well. And I also like the fact that they didn't try to kind of bend and do all kinds of gymnastics and cartwheels around the words to kind of avoid the, you know, with great power comes great responsibility phrase that was used in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. They just said it. Like, they said it as is. It was recognizable, unlike with the first Amazing Spider-Man film, where, you know, Uncle Ben in that film is talking about power, responsibility, but refusing to say those words. Like, no, here we just have that message clearly laid out right before Aunt May dies, and it is a heartbreaking sequence. Now, after suffering the loss of his final family member that he had closest to him, Peter just kind of disappears for a bit. He is beside himself with loss and with misery and agony, and his friends aren't able to find him. So Ned turns to this cute little magic trick that he saw Doctor Strange perform, and he tries and calls out for Peter, but he is unknowingly calling out for any Peter Parker in the multiverse. And then we have this scene we have this scene in Ned's house that blew everyone's minds. It's at this point that I should point out, okay, that when I saw this film, it was at 3 p.m. on Wednesday, and it was right after school had ended for a lot of students in the UK, which meant that there were a bunch of school kids who had rushed from school post-haste to get to this 3 p.m. showing of Spider-Man No Way Home. So the cinema was jam-packed with like young people who were so live. The viewing was lit. I'm not even gonna lie. The viewing was so lit. At first I was scared that they were gonna be chatting the whole time, but in moments where it required silence, people were silent. And then in the moments where we had to cheer, in the moments where the film blew our minds, Everyone erupted. It was incredible. It was like watching Endgame again. It was one of the most memorable cinema going experiences ever. Like, I absolutely loved it. And one such moment was, of course, when we finally get the entrance of one of the previous Spider-Men. First up, we have Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, and I have to say, even as we saw the portal, even as we just see, you know, the Doctor Strange portal that is, you know, surrounding this little circle of navy, there was something about it that just felt so distinctly Mark Webb's Spider-Man. Like, something about the cinematography where I was like, I know that scene. And sure, it's because I've rewatched the Spider-Man films recently, so it was fresh on my mind. But I'm telling you, when I saw, when I just saw that circle and I just saw him inside there and he's in the alleyway, I was like, God damn it, God damn it. And again, I'm telling you, I'm not the biggest Spider-Man fan, but I was like out of my seat. Everyone erupted in the cinema. It was incredible. And then he comes through the portal and wow, like just wow. And again, we knew this was happening. Like, even though Andrew Garfield was lying through his teeth because of those Marvel snipers, we knew that this was happening. But to see it happen on screen is just a completely different story. And I don't even care that the reason why he's there is kind of contrived and silly. Like, you know, it's MJ and Ned trying to find Peter and they're searching for him using these portals. Even though later on it's revealed that MJ knows exactly where Peter would be during this time anyway. So they didn't really need the input of any of the other Spider-Men. But I don't care. Like, it doesn't matter why they're there. They're there. I also found it so fitting that Andrew Garfield was wearing his Spider-Man suit throughout the whole film, because fans have often said that, you know, whilst his Peter Parker was a little bit unconvincing, whilst he wasn't the best Peter Parker, he did make for a sick Spider-Man. And so the fact that he was wearing the suit throughout his appearance in this film just made sense. Like, oh, it just put a smile on my face every time I saw Andrew Garfield. I'm telling you, he was phenomenal in this film. And I actually think, in my humble opinion, out of the two huge Spider-Man cameos that we got, he was my favorite. Now, even just with his arrival, I was super impressed and excited to see Andrew Garfield in this film. But the moment that really cemented in my mind that he was the best cameo in this entire film, in my opinion, was the scene that we get later down the line where he finally redeems himself and is able to save MJ. So let me set the scene for you guys right now. Okay, so we're in the cinema, we're in the real world. People, including myself, had already guessed, you know, seeing the trailers where MJ is falling, just like Gwen Stacy did in Amazing Spider-Man 2. People had guessed that perhaps if Andrew was going to make an appearance, that he would be the one to save her, because it would make sense, and narratively things would just come full circle in the most beautiful way. So a lot of us already saw this coming. But again, when it comes to this film, it doesn't matter what you predicted before, because seeing it play out on screen is a whole different animal. And so when you see MJ fall, you have that moment, the whole crowd goes crazy, the whole crowd knows what's going to happen, and then Tom Holland's Peter Parker is reaching out to grab her. He gets taken by the Green Goblin. I'm telling you, that guy was badass in this film. He gets taken by Green Goblin, and then it's Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker who reaches out and takes her. And not only does he take her, not only does he save her, but he holds her in his arms. Because in the Amazing Spider-Man 2, he tried to grab Gwen with his web, and it ended up, you know, breaking her neck or banging her head on the concrete floor. I don't know what killed her. Whereas this time around, he scoops up MJ. And then you see, like, we have this moment of like revelation, like, oh my God, he saved her. The whole crowd was cheering. And then you look up at Andrew Garfield's face and everyone went dead silent. Guys, everyone went dead silent. And then there was just sniffling. Everyone was crying. Everyone was crying. I had tears down my face. Are you kidding? Are you kidding? This film is full of emotional, heartwarming, heartfelt moments. But that moment took the cake for me. I don't care. That moment where he saves MJ and you see the look on his face, like in his mind, he's thinking about how he lost Gwen Stacy 100%. And he's thinking about how if only that was her, like if only he had been able to do that for her. But at the same time, you can see that he's glad that he was able to do that for this world's Peter. Like he was glad that he was able to save his Gwen Stacy. That, oh, I was crying. So yeah, Andrew Garfield wins for me in terms of, you know, who comes out on top in two of the biggest cameos of all time in any franchise movie. But, you know, Tobey Maguire is nothing to sniff at either. He comes through the portal secondly, and people absolutely lost their minds once again. Like, I didn't actually expect it to be so soon afterwards. There were a lot of rumors about Tobey's reluctance to, you know, go back into the franchise, and, you know, rumors about salary negotiations and whatnot. So there was this feeling that perhaps he had left it really late and he would only be making a small cameo, but he was in it for the same amount of time as Andrew Garfield. I do feel like they may have, you know, filmed his scenes later on, because in a lot of those scenes where, you know, they're in Ned's living room, you just see him and he's interacting like into the middle distance, not necessarily interacting with Andrew Garfield directly. So perhaps it's kind of some like camera trickery to make it look like they're in the same room at the same time. But regardless, they are in the same room at the same time. And, you know, Tobey Maguire coming in, once again, he's dressed as Peter Parker. He's got regular clothes on, unlike Andrew Garfield, who is in full Spider-Man regalia. And it again reflects the fact that Tobey Maguire has often been seen by fans as like a great Peter Parker, but a less than perfect Spider-Man. Although a part of me was really nervous that he wasn't going to change into the Spider-Man costume, and then he had it like underneath, and I was like, oh thank God. Like, oh my goodness, seeing all three of them dressed as Spider-Man, are you kidding? That made my decade. Then when the two were introduced into the story, we got these incredible interactions. We got like our wildest dreams fulfilled in those moments. I love the fact that they slowed down the plot a little bit and gave the fans exactly what they wanted. Like, they gave us everything. First of all, of course, as I mentioned, you know, when these two are introduced, something horrific has happened to the MCU Peter Parker, and he's going through a really difficult time. And so we actually see them head over to the roof of his high school, and you get that shot where they're both like on a chimney or something and the moon is behind them. You just see these two Spider-Man. That is such an iconic shot already. But it's in that moment where Peter, you know, sees them, and he's not even wholly surprised. He's not like all in shock that they're there, because his mind is in like a completely different place, and they're trying to console him and try to make him understand that they understand what he's going through. Of course, being Peter Parker's, this character is actually really tragic and is surrounded by death and the loss of his close ones often, you know, in any iteration that we have. And so, you know, they have that kind of bonding experience, which I think is just so beautiful. Again, like, this is exactly what we want. And then of course you have the moment where Peter says his aunt told him that with great power, and then Tobey Maguire's Peter responds with comes great responsibility, and that was just, it was everything. And then of course, because this is an MCU movie, we also have some cute little banter, and like really this was a very meta experience. This was a very meta moment where some of the, you know, fan theories and fan discussions that have taken place over the last 20 years were kind of addressed in these moments. So for example, the web shooters. We had the mention of the web shooters, the fact that Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man has organic shooters, like he creates these webs organically, whereas Andrew Garfield and Tom Holland's Spider-Man have manufactured web shooters, like they've actually created it, and so they have this like back and forth, especially Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. Like, it was incredible. Again, it just felt like these three brothers, with Tom Holland being the youngest, Andrew Garfield being, you know, the middle child, and Tobey Maguire being the older, you know, kind of youth pastor sibling. It just felt like they were having this interaction, like it's it's been a while since they've been together, and now they're linking up again and just having a chat, even as the world is burning down around them. I loved it. I could have easily sat there and just watched the interactions for hours on end. And another reference that we get is, you know, Tobey Maguire, who actually injured his back during the filming of, I think, Spider-Man 2 or 3, and to the point where he was actually going to be replaced by, I believe, Jake Gyllenhaal, funnily enough. But yeah, he injured his back during the filming of those films, and we get a reference to that when he's like, oh, my back hurts, and Andrew Garfield like stretches his back out for him. You can't make this shit up. And then finally, I mean, I'm sure there's a bunch of references that I haven't even touched on, and if you have any yourself, and if you have any of your favorite moments, be sure to comment down below and let me know, because I would love to hear them. But the final one that came to mind for me was when they're in the school lab and they're, you know, trying to figure out these different cures for these different villains. And I did note that, you know, the first two Peter Parkers are more chemistry inclined, whereas our Peter Parker, who's been hanging around Tony Stark a bunch, has a bit more of a technological mind, which I think makes sense, again, in the context of their respective universes. But anyways, we do get that moment that was quite heavy-handed but still delightful, where Ned kind of calls out for a Peter Parker and they all answer. And to me, that was kind of like a cute interpretation of the classic Spider-Man meme. Okay, so now that we've talked about 2 out of the 3 Spider-Men, of course I have to mention Tom Holland himself, who absolutely nailed it in this film. I think he gave a phenomenal performance as Peter Parker. He hit the nail on the head when it came to all of the emotional beats in this film, especially considering how emotional in general it really was. Like, this film ends in tragedy. This film ends with the whole world forgetting who Peter Parker is. Not just forgetting that he's Spider-Man, but literally just forgetting him to the point where it feels like he never existed to begin with. And initially he has plans to reintroduce himself into his world, you know, into his inner circle of friends and family, but then he decides that they're better off without him, that they seem to be thriving without him, and so now he's just living in seclusion and he's all alone, and we see him move into this dusty apartment just like Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man had to in the Sam Raimi franchise, and he's, you know, setting out a new journey by himself. He's taking the GED now because he can't go to school, I guess, and he's still Spider-Manning. And then at the very end there we see that he actually changes the suit, and I feel like that was kind of an homage to the Spider-Man that he met, and of course showing that he has divested somewhat from the Tony Stark version of Spider-Man or the Mysterio version to become, you know, his own version. So Tom Holland in this film, I think, gave his very best performance as this character. And again, considering how much is going on around him and how exciting, you know, all of these cameos are, all of these callbacks, the fact that he was still able to hold his own against all of that, and that this film did feel uniquely like a, you know, John Watts / Tom Holland Spider-Man movie, is really a testament to how well he did here. So I had a really fun time with this film, like, I don't know if you can tell. So with all of that being said, I'm going to be giving Spider-Man No Way Home a 9 out of 10. Okay, so there are a few end credit scenes that I think I should slot in here in the end credits, I guess, of this video. First of all, we have the Venom end credit scene. That was kind of meaningless. Like, it was fun to see Venom in the MCU, but we didn't really like, we didn't see him interacting with any MCU characters. He listed them off, and like, I guess Venom himself was, you know, informing Eddie of, you know, the sequence of events that played out in the MCU, but then they're promptly taken back to their universe anyways, and we see the guy from Ted Lasso kind of, you know, looking on and wondering where they went. It was just, you know, it was fine, but it was weak, if I'm being honest. But the second, you know, end credit scene that we get is actually a trailer for Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness. I didn't have much to say about this trailer, if I'm being honest, because a lot of what they showed is stuff that I already know is coming, but it was pretty cool to see a trailer at the end of the film. Like, that's a pretty huge thing that we've never seen the MCU do before. And I think the most exciting part of that trailer was the reveal of this Dark Doctor Strange, aka perhaps Doctor Strange Supreme. If we get that, then I will be really, really excited to see what they do with the character in the live action version, because those of us who have watched What If are already in the know, and we know the possibilities are endless. So that should be really exciting to see. And also Baron Mordo has dreadlocks now. Interesting. But that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on Spider-Man No Way Home, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this film, this event, this experience down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. My Spider-Man content has not yet ended, so stay tuned for more. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really, really appreciate it, especially this one. It was long. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.